Hello and welcome to the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast. My name is Steve Smith and I am your host. It's going to be a little bit different this one. We're calling this is a segment, the Greenkeeper Shed, for all you golfers out there that are interested in learning a little bit more, talking a little bit about the Open Championship and the home of golf. This is episode number 62. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast, and a segment that I haven't had for quite some time. It's had a little bit of a breakaway, an absence, if you like, from the media stream of the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast, and that is the Greenkeeper Shed. And the idea behind the Greenkeeper Shed is to inform all of you golfers out there that just want to learn a little bit more, maybe aren't so sure about what goes on out there on the golf courses in front of you. Sometimes try and educate you about a few more of the bits and pieces that you might see on television and why you see certain things and some of the things you learn out there while you're playing golf as well. That's the idea behind the Greenkeeper Shed, and this one is I'm going to put a little bit of a rough title on it. It's going to be called Your Course versus the Old Course, and the old course being that of St Andrews in Scotland, the home of golf, the home of the Royal and Ancient Golf Club that it is. That is home there as well, and obviously on the back of what is just started out there is the 150th edition of the Men's Open Championship that is held at St Andrews Golf Club this year. Very exciting times ahead for a lot of us that love to see the home of golf and see how the course plays, see the differences, and certainly see the challenges and the competition between the players and the pros to see who will come out on top at the end of the 72-hole championship event that it is. Now, the reason I call it Your Course versus the Old Course is because there's going to be people out there, there's going to be golfers out there that are going to look at some of the television coverage, hopefully, some of the highlights in time as weeks go by as well. You're going to watch things back and look at little bits and pieces. And if you're anything like me, you want to learn about the golf course. Now, I will say up front, I have never been to St Andrews. I have never been to Scotland, the home of golf. I've never been to the British Isles. It's nothing that I have experience with or have ever been there with, but I have read a bit about it. I have looked at plenty of photos, and I do, because I'm a greenkeeper and a superintendent, I've got experience in grasses, in the golf course maintenance side of things, and I am able to look at photos, look at videos, and pick bits and pieces about some of those things, and certainly a knowledge and experience that I've had doing my time as greenkeeping through most of my career. There's things that I want to point out to you that some of the golfers, like I say out there, that might look at the British links, certainly in this case of this weekend, it's the home of golf, St Andrews, and go, that's very different. I've never seen anything like that where I play golf. My home golf course doesn't have any of those features. And I want to try and explain some of them so that when you're watching some of the golf, you get a bit more of an understanding, and certainly some of the things that might relate back to some of your golf course. And there might be some elements that you'll go, I had no idea. That's what I want this one to be about. So your course versus the old course. I want you to think about it when you're watching the Open, and I urge everyone to watch at least some of the Open Championship at St Andrews this weekend, because it is very interesting. It is quite different, certainly different, as I always talk about, the single-dimensional golf of the PGA Tour that we're so accustomed to watching, which is dead boring if you ask me, and that's what makes this so exciting. That's what makes golf on the British Isles so exciting, and I love to see more of links golf as well, and we're going to see some really interesting golf play out over this weekend, the next 4 days of golf at St Andrews, as I've just mentioned. Now let's get on with the beginning of it. St Andrews Golf Course is public land. One of the biggest things that people don't realise is it's public land, and it's closed on Sundays. And the public can go out there and they have picnics on the 1st and the 18th. The famous yawning wide double fairway. It looks like a giant football field with a tee at one end and a green at the other end, and it's dissected by the Swilken Burn, which is basically it's a creek of sorts. It's a timber-lined creek that holds the banks up vertical, and it's got water running through it out to the ocean there, where they are at Fife, where St Andrews is. And it's quite an interesting thought we often think about public access golf courses in Australia, and I'm going to relate all this back to Australia. I am an Australian-based podcast for those of you that aren't sure, the first time tuning in. We often look at public access golf courses and public spaces that are golf courses on public land, council land, public land, and we attribute it and go, well, you've got to be able to have access to play it, so anyone can go up and play golf. But what we're talking about at St Andrews is slightly different yet again, and they have whole different rules and laws and bits and pieces of public land ownership and the like over there, which I don't know enough about to go into detail, so I can't speak on behalf of that one. But they allow people on Sundays when they don't play golf to go out there and kids go and have fun, kick a footy around, do whatever. Just go and walk the golf course or walk the beautiful landscape, the open space that links between, I suppose, the township that's there and the beaches and along the water edges there of St Andrews. It's an interesting space, so it's public land. It started out, curiously, for a lot of people, which you may or may not know, it started out as 22 holes. And it ran 11 holes out. It's quite a linear golf course. Doesn't sort of work in a sort of like a squarish, rectangular shaped boundary that we're accustomed to, again, a lot of the times here in Australia. It's very linear. It's what we call out and in. And once upon a time, it was 11 holes. You play 11 holes out to the far end of the property, and then they would play the 11 holes back in to those same greens. And in around 1764, they combined 4 holes into basically 2 holes became one, and then another 2 holes became another hole. I think that was in the first and the second in 17 and 18, I think is what it was on the layout that we see today. But they brought it down from 22 to 18, and that became the standard. That became the standard-ish number of holes. As we know, there's 9s and all sorts of different things. From time to time, you'll come across some quirks. It's usually half. But that's when things changed in 1764 is what is noted as a date, that when it went from 22 to 18 holes. Again, I don't know a lot of the detailed, in-depth history of St Andrews, and I won't pretend to either, but doing my little bit of research will tell you that that's roughly when that happened and when it became the standard for a championship after that they started playing and competing for 18 holes, I should say. But we consider 18 holes standard modern golf. That's just the usual thing that we talk about. That layout to 18 holes, incidentally, to give you an idea of time, was decided upon before Europeans first came across the mainland of Australia, which is in 1770. So we're talking quite some time ago. Now, I will ask you the question, have you ever noticed on your scorecard, if you're a beginner who's played a bit of golf, you might have played golf for quite some time and never really understood it or noticed it. I know plenty of people who have played golf socially and not sure. It says out and in on the end of 9 holes. The front 9 usually says out and the back 9 usually says in, where you write your scores to total up the 9 holes. The reason they say that is because it's based around St Andrews, which is, like I said, it's a linear golf course. They play 9 holes out, away from the clubhouse, and then the back 9 holes are played what they call in. They're the inward 9. So the outward 9 and the inward 9. Because it's a linear golf course, you literally play 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, in order of walking away from the clubhouse. You're walking out. There's a little loop at the top of St Andrews around 8, 9, 10 before it turns around and comes back with 11. And then you come back in, and they're the inward 9. So on your scorecard it says out and in, and that's in a reference to the original golf course, St Andrews, which was an out and in linear style loop. It's very different to anything that most people, most golfers, most of you out there, certainly even myself, it's very different to anything we would normally come across. So when you're watching it on television, because it's a linear golf course, it's out and back, or out and in, they run side by side. So you notice some weird things when you're watching it on television. Some very unusual things. And some of those is that, like I said, it's not 2 loops of 9. It doesn't go out and back in a 9-hole loop and out and back in an 8-hole loop. It's out for 9 and in 9. So there is no rest point, if you like. It's just all the way out and all the way back. But some of the weird things that you'll find are things like, take the first, and I mentioned that enormous football field size fairway that's the first and the 18th. It's a twin fairway. It's a double fairway. There's no rough in between. There's no trees defining the first and the 18th hole. You can hit it from the first tee over towards the 18th tee, and that's essentially still the first fairway. And you're a good square sideways. In actual fact, I just saw Ian Poole to do it in his start of his round just today, being round one. It's quite large. It's a very, very large. Some of these double fairways are extremely large. Some of them have rough between them in parts, and some of them are joined. So you'll often see players out on essentially what we would consider the wrong hole. But that's the way that St Andrews works. It's a very linear golf course, so that there's two holes side by side, out and in. One's going in a northerly direction, and one's going in a southerly direction, essentially. And you can hit it over on the other fairway. And if that gives you an advantage, depending on the wind, depending on how you want to, where the pin location is on the green, how you want to attack the hole, then so be it. You can hit it out that way. That's okay. So you're seeing different things. You'll see lots of these double fairways that we don't normally see on golf courses. You do see it on some here in Australia, but generally speaking, you'll see golf holes often defined by rough or trees. They're often segregated from each other by those means. And sometimes you'll see bunkers and waste areas and things like that, but they're essentially define hole by hole. You won't often see too many golf holes in your golfing career if you're just a social golfer or learner of the game. These are things that you're not going to often come across here in Australia. Again, I don't know how commonplace it is over in Scotland. Not been there myself, not seen lots of other golf courses. But here in Australia, what we see on television watching St Andrews is quite unique. The other thing you're going to come across are double greens, what we call double greens. You're going to see some enormous greens watching St Andrews that have two pin locations. Two pins, two holes cut in them, quite far apart. That's because they have what we call double greens that are so enormous that there's more than plenty of room to have two. Their greens are enormous in general, but they have two pin locations, one for, let's say, the second hole as you head north, which is doubled with the 16th hole coming back, heading south. So the outward second hole has the same common green surface as the 16th hole coming in. Two different pins, quite far apart, very, very large green. But it's essentially one green, but two different pins. That's why you'll see a number on the flag. And the flags are two different colours. I can't remember what they are this year. I'm not sure if it's red and yellow. I could be, and might need to be corrected without looking up my data and details and research on that one. But they're two different colours. So players know which hole to go for if they're unsure, depending on the angle that they're coming in from. So you're going to see double greens. And some golf courses you might have played on a double green before. You might go, wow, that's a really cool quirk, a double green. I'm just trying to think where I've recently played a double green. I know I've played one. Can't think of it off the top of my head. I think there's one at Robina Woods. I think might be a double green that I recently played. Often separated or joined, I should say, by a small finger of common cut turf. But you'll see 7 of them at St Andrews. Not just one double green. There's 7 double greens. Again, a quirk that we don't often know about or hear much of in Australia. Don't often come across. But you'll see it, and you're going to see 7 of them over there at St Andrews. And you might be wondering why. They're so big, it's a linear golf course. They play to the common space. Makes sense. Back in the day, 200 and something, upwards of 300 years ago. That's what they have. And they're enormous greens. Some of the pin locations, you're going to hear that pin placements are going to be 60, 70 yards on the green surface from the front edge. These putts can be staggering. If you hit it on, say, the left side of a green or towards the middle of of the double green, you might have a 60, 70 yard putt across the green. So you're going to see some really, really long putts. That's the other thing you're going to see at St Andrews. So much longer than anything we've seen before. Anything certainly on the PGA Tour. Massive greens. They're huge. There's another quirk that's part of St Andrews that's often frowned upon, very much so here in Australia from a safety perspective. And it's a quirk that you're not really going to see again in tournament golf. And that's crossover holes. So I think it's 7 and 11 at St Andrews. They cross each other, literally in the middle of the hole. So you'll have people playing their second shot to the 7th, and people playing their, I think the 11th is a par 3. You have to bear with me while I work it out. But they essentially play across each other. They literally play across each other, like a cross shape. One goes from left to right and one goes from right to left. Very, very unusual to come across. And we certainly rarely see it. There are some examples. I think it's, I'm not sure if it's Chatswood, but there's one course in Sydney that has a crossover T section. But golf clubs, insurance companies, committees, they don't like it. It's too dangerous, especially at busy fields. At least on a tournament. Like I said, I shouldn't say tournaments because St Andrews is a public access golf course. It's full quite regularly because people want to play St Andrews. It's a hallowed ground. It's my bucket list. It's my number 1 for me. But it's got a crossover hole. 2, double crossover. Very unusual to see. One that I'll certainly be interested to see it how it plays on television. So another interesting quirk. These are all things that you're going to see on television. Massive double fairways, linear type golf course out and in, double greens, plenty of them, huge greens on a scale that you've never seen before, and crossover holes. Very, very interesting. Now, all that, strangely enough, because it's a linear golf course, it's quite a narrow golf course, because they're side by side and you can play all over the place, there's plenty of options, plenty of width, plenty of extreme width, and that gives you choice as a player. The other thing about St Andrews is, whilst it's quite flat being on the coastal dunescape, as it were, these aren't enormous dunes. These aren't towering sand dunes like you might see at Barnbugle in Tasmania, for example. Some of the other British Isle golf courses that you might see on television, famous photographs, they're not some of the towering dunes that you've seen there where holes are routed in between them. It's quite different. It's relatively calm in the ground movement on a large scale, but on a smaller scale, there's lots of movement, lots of small stuff, lots of things that affect the bounce of the ball. So once we zoom into the scale of ball movement, not things you've got to hit around or the golf holes are routed around, we zoom into the ball and the ground movement, there is plenty going on at St Andrews. There is so much happening. Lots of humps, lots of hollows, lots of bunkers, lots of mounds in greens, lots of hollows in greens, lots of hollows around the edges of greens, fall-off areas. You're going to see people putting from potentially 30, 40 metres out sometimes. You're going to see lots of bump and runs. You're going to see the ball swing different directions. You're going to see all sorts of imaginative golf shots played at St Andrews at the Open Championship this weekend because it has the ground game. And when we talk about the ground game in golf, we're talking about how the ball reacts and plays around the nuances in the turf surface and the elevation changes. Because it's going to run and it's going to roll and it's going to bounce. If you have a soft golf course with long grass, i.e. all of the PGA Tour, and it's a broad brush, but if you have that, you don't have the ground game. That's why you see target golf on the PGA Tour. You are very much not going to see target golf at St Andrews this weekend. Because the greens, if you're Australian, it's familiar to the sandbelt, the greens are hard and fast. They bounce like buggery. And if you look at the baked out colours, and when I say baked out colours, you're not going to see a lot of green grass at St Andrews this weekend. You're going to see a lot of brown. It's summertime over there, even though I think their daytime maxes are talking about being 12 and 15 degrees. It's summertime. They haven't had a lot of rain this summer. And certainly in the lead up, they've had very little, if any. So it's hard, it's fast, it's a sand base, which means it's doubly hard. It drains exceptionally well. So the water inputs to maintain the golf course are free draining. They move very quickly through the profile. They maintain the surfaces extremely well there and keep thatch to a minimum. So we have an extreme bounce scenario, which is what we want. We want to see the ball move. It's going to be difficult for the players to control that ball, and the people who do it the best are the ones who are going to have the least number of shots, and they're going to be the ones competing for the win. Gravity is going to take hold a lot more on St Andrews than it does on anything you've ever seen on the PGA Tour. And quite possibly anything you've played if you're a golfer who plays just a local club, local municipal golf course, a local members golf club, where there's lots more green grass. Certainly this year on the east coast of Australia, we've got plenty of rain. So we've got soft golf courses if you're able to play them. We've got lots of grass around, lots of rough. You're not going to have that. You're not going to see that on television. Those familiar with the Sandbelt and some of the golf courses down there in Melbourne certainly know exactly what we're talking about. In certainly this year, I know you haven't had a lot of rain down there in Melbourne, from what I've heard from a lot of people working on golf courses down there. But you're going to see the bounce game and the running game, where the ball interacts with the short stuff, the shortcut grass, rolls, bumps, bounces, weird bounces. You're going to see all sorts of things too, because they're going to land on the side of mounds. They're going to land in the faces of bunkers, and I'll get to the bunkers in a minute at St Andrews. You're going to see all sorts of weird stuff, and that's the beauty of the game of golf, is chance. So you have to work out how best to play your ball from the position that you're in, but there's an element of chance as well, where it lands and how you're going to make your way and navigate your way to the golf hole. That's what we want to see. We want to see the best players in the world doing that. That's why the Open Championship is so entertaining to watch, especially when it's dry, firm, and fast, which is what it is this weekend. So it's exciting. This is really exciting to watch, and this is why I want you to go and watch some of the golf this weekend, even if it's some highlights later on. You're going to see a different type of golf to anything you've ever seen, and you're going to wonder why it's so different to what you're used to playing yourself. And these are some of the reasons why, like I said. So gravity's going to take hold. You're going to see balls rolling around corners and off mounds and bouncing and kicking and running. It's going to be people are going to get mad kicks forward from drives and get an extra 50 metres. And you're going to see balls roll backwards as people approach the greens, or even drives that might hit an upslope on a fairway and they stop and roll backwards. You're going to see all sorts of different things going on, and this is the chance of golf. This is why you end up dealing with whatever you're dealt, wherever your ball finishes, because you can't often pinpoint it specifically on a golf course like St Andrews and say, I'm going to hit it 250 metres down the fairway. I'm going to hit it 150 metres from here, and I'm going to hit it to that point. And no, like we try to always make happen with influence on golf course preparations here on a lot of our local clubs so that it's consistent. Well, that's not really how golf is meant to be, guys. There's a lot of chance involved, and that's how it should be, because that's the challenge of the game, is to deal with what you're dealt, to make the most out of every scenario. That's the challenge of golf. We can't always control everything, and if we make it too contrived, it doesn't become golf anymore. So like I said, you're going to see extreme width. You're going to see plenty of options. Guys play holes differently throughout the weekend, depending on the weather. And you're going to see guys play differently to each other. Different angles to greens, different angles to pins. So it's going to be entertaining to watch. Now, some of the other quirks that you'll hear in commentary is the golf holes are 1 to 18, but some of the things, if you look it up, they actually have names. The golf holes have names. A bit unusual, a bit like Augusta. Augusta has names for their golf holes. So too does St Andrews. And that's an interesting one. It's some of the quirks that are different over there to what we're used to here in Australia. I can't think of a golf course in Australia that's got names. And I've played plenty. Nothing springs to mind. There you go. But not only do the golf holes have names, but there's other features of the golf course that have names as well. Must be a Scottish thing? Not sure. time? Not sure. Does that make you want to name things as well? But there's a golf hole called the Road Hole, number 17. It's a very long par 4 from the back tees. And one of the quirks of the Road Hole, and I love talking about quirks at St Andrews because they are everywhere. This is far from what we would consider normal golf. And if you transplanted some of these things to your local golf course, so many people would be up in arms and would remove them instantly. One of the things about the Road Hole is you hit a blind tee shot across the corner of the old train sheds, literally over the buildings. So the buildings are in the way between the tee and the fairway from the back tee. That's not something I would ever come across on a golf course, if I'm being honest. And you play literally over the out of bounds. Then you play your second shot towards a green, and the green runs sort of diagonally from the front right to the back left with a very small, deep pot bunker, as we call them at St Andrews. Pot bunker, that's what we call them. Aussies about the pot bunker style over there. Deep and small. And it goes to this deep pot bunker, somewhere around the middle of the green, on the sort of the flanking the left side of the green, and then you've got a road that runs behind the green flanking the right side of the green as you're playing the golf hole. Very, very difficult green. Very difficult green. And this is a hole to watch in the tournament. If you're going to watch much golf, the 17th hole, the Road Hole, a famous hole, it's one you're going to watch because it's really entertaining. That's some of the things they do. They name the golf holes. Now, there's 112 bunkers, is what my research tells me at St Andrews. I haven't counted them. Like I said, I've never been there. 112 bunkers. Now, the bunkers and some of the features of the golf course have names, like I said. It's just what they do. Also, the creek that runs across 18th fairway and the first fairway juts right up against the front of the first green. We would just call it a creek. Over at St Andrews, it has a name. It's called the Swilcan Burn. The burn is another name for a creek, I believe. So they name things. They name their bunkers. There's Hell Bunker. The Principal's Nose bunkers. That's an interesting name. There's also a group of bunkers called the Spectacles. There's so many quirks about St Andrews. It's so interesting. Age gives it so much interest and so many quirks because it's from a different time. That's the other thing you got to remember. Like I said before, they changed it to 18 holes in 1764. So I really urge you to watch. It's quite different. There's another name for another little landform they've got on the 18th. I believe old Tom Morris added it to the 18th green. It's called the Valley of Sin. How cool does that sound? How cool does that sound on a golf? The Valley of Sin. What the hell is that? I'm already scared. What the hell is the Valley of Sin? Well, when you watch the closing round, and I hope you do, I really do, the 18th green has a really deep valley of grass. It's all turf. Some of it's cut short green height turf. It's called the Valley of Sin. So when the flag or the pin location's at the front left, just on top of the Valley of Sin, it's an extremely difficult shot to attack that because it's not sand, it's grass, and it's fast grass. So your ball gravitates down into that hollow. So if you get it wrong, if you're coming from the right-hand side of the fairway along the out of bounds and you've got a pin at the front left just on top of the Valley of Sin, that's a really interesting shot, but you've got plenty of green to work with. If you're coming from the left-hand side, which is the big open area of the double fairway, the first and the 18th fairway, and the safe side, there's plenty of room to miss your tee shot over there. So safe, a landing zone, and you got the pin on the front left of the green just on top of the Valley of Sin. You have what is considered probably one of the most difficult golf shots going around. You've got to somehow navigate your way through or over the Valley of Sin. And there's famous footage, and I can't think of who it was, and I only just recently saw it again, of one of the Open Championships in years gone by, where one of the contenders, it's actually really bad, I can't think of his name, took him, I think, 3 shots to get through the Valley of Sin because he just couldn't get it right to get it up there and keep it up there without bashing it to the back of the green, of course. So your mind starts playing all sorts of tricks on you. And that's the beauty of short-cut turf. That's the beauty of humps and hollows. That's the beauty of St Andrews. That's the beauty of links golf, is you don't have You don't have to have always long grass or bunkers to be a hazard, to mess with your mind as a player. You can have shortcut turf, be it fairway height or green height, knowing that you've got to get across it or get through it. And gravity is going to take hold if you don't get it right. And some of that stuff can be the most difficult, challenging shots in golf. Short grass. Navigating the humps and hollows of short grass. The Valley of Sin. One of the most infamous, challenging parts of a golf course in the world. Now, I haven't got to bunkers yet, but we'll get to bunkers. Green grass types. So St Andrews has a blend of fescue, bent and poa. You've heard me talk about all those grasses before, certainly on Keeper of the Greens. Plenty of golf courses in Australia with fescue grasses. Maybe not on green surfaces, but if you go to Tassie, there are. Barnbugle is. Plenty of golf courses with bent grass. It's probably a very common type of cool season grass on a lot of the southern courses in Australia. And certainly poa, another popular grass for golf greens in the southern parts of Australia. Common turf surfaces, same as a lot of golf courses that you will have played. There's nothing new here. I've heard the green speeds that they're expecting to prepare for the tournament are going to be around 10.5, 11.5, depending on how much they dry out and how much the wind gets up. But somewhere around that 10.5, 11.5 mark. That's a stimp meter reading. That's feet based on a ball being lifted and let go down an inclined aluminium ramp from a specific release point and how far it rolls along a level surface on that turf and before it comes to rest. 10.5, 11.5 feet. I've prepared the greens that I used to prepare at Katoomba. If they got around 10, we're in trouble because a lot of our greens were too steep for that. That's not too bad, but you hear ridiculous numbers come out of the States. 13s and 14s. I've even heard those in Australia as well. Got to be careful with those numbers. 10.5, I think this is a really good speed of golf greens to watch. And of course, there's lots of movement. You'll see in the images coming out of St Andrews, there's lots of steep slopes on the greens at St Andrews. So they're conscious of what they can and can't do. But 10.5 is going to be great to watch. You're going to see balls move all over the place. I can't wait. But it's a grass type, a grass blend that we're very used to seeing here in Australia. You would have played on it, most likely. So it's nothing new here. Just good quality surfaces on a sandy base. Minimal thatch. Maximum soil interaction with the golf ball as balls come into land from great heights sometimes. That's why you're going to get bounce. That's why you're not going to have a lot of give. The golf course is dry in the lead up to this event, the 150th. It's going to be very interesting to watch. But these are all some of the things I want you as golfers when you're watching the event to look at, and you'll be like, that. How do you understand and rationalize what you're seeing? Well, I'm trying to help you, and how it's different to what you're used to. It's on a sandy base. Whilst you might have played on fescues, bents, and poa greens before, potentially all over the place, you unless you've been to the Sandbelt, you may not have seen a golf course that's going to interact the way it does on television here, because it's on a sandy base, minimal thatch, but the same grasses. It's prepared differently, different environment. Like I said, you're going to see double greens, which you won't often come across. It's a linear golf course, which you won't often come across. The only linear golf course I can think of is here in Sydney at Eastlake. It's an out and in golf course. Linear, side by side. They don't do the double greens like they do at St Andrews. It's not quite that close together. Crossover holes, double fairways, massive width, hole names, bunker names. You'll hear them refer to different things as well. It's quite interesting. This is all very different. But I wanted to give you a bit of an understanding, something to break down, because they're not going to be able to explain it to you as much on television. They do explain some things wonderfully well. But they're also trying to commentate on the competition and the tournament at hand. So I want to give you some things to look at, to think about, and try and break down what you're seeing and what you're hearing. But the rise and the fall, the movement in the ground, and at that zoomed-in level, you're going to see some beautiful golf shots, some incredibly talented golfers navigate their way around St Andrews. It's quite different. Now we get to the bunkers, which is probably the final piece that I wanted to talk about. The bunkers at St Andrews. We call them pot-style bunkers. Now we do have some examples of pot bunkers here in Australia. We've seen them at Moona Links. I think it's the tournament course. I know we've had them at New South Wales Golf Club here in Sydney. The Moona Links, of course, is in Melbourne, down the Mornington Peninsula, I should say, in Melbourne. At New South Wales Golf Club here in Sydney, we have pot-style bunkers. Now, there are some other places that have them. They're probably a couple of the more well-known ones. We don't have a lot of them here in Australia. Let me just tell you what they are first. So what you're looking at, when you see them, they've got very vertical faces, what we call bunker faces. So the sides of the bunkers are vertical, almost, at St Andrews. So they have, more often than not, flat bottoms of sand, but vertical faces of no sand. And what the vertical faces are made of, and we call them revetted faced bunkers. And what they're made of is layers of turf stacked on top of each other. So that's why you get those, looks like lines across the bunker faces. It's because it is literally stacked grass. It's a turf cut stacked on top of each other, forms a gravity retaining wall. And that holds back the land behind it, and that gives an extremely penal style of bunker, because it's very, very difficult to get distance out of a bunker shot at St Andrews, because more often than not, you're quite close to those vertical faces. So it requires a very high, short distance shot just to get out. So the penalty of being in the bunker there is nearly more often than not a distance stroke just to get out. Sometimes you'll see players not get out at all because they can be quite difficult shots indeed. Some of them are really small, not much more than you being able to swing a club in. Some of them are quite large. Hell bunker's quite large. And you can hit a little bit further if you're not quite up against the face. But the pot-style bunkers, what we call revetted style bunkers, is stacked layered turf to retain the ground around the bunker itself, which is the sand depression. And that's what the bunkers that you're seeing over there, the pot-style bunkers at St Andrews, are. So that stacked layered turf holds all the ground back, and some of the time, the bunkers are put in natural depressions. So you'll see golf balls just run and roll up and down, left and right, and eventually they'll just roll into a bunker. You're going to see them swing sideways into bunkers. They're gravity points. It's chance. Someone didn't mishit it into some of these bunkers. Gravity took the ball there as the ball was rolling down the fairway. Some of them are in the middle of the fairways, where you might consider it to be a good shot, and the challenge is to not hit it in that bunker. So if you lay up well short of said bunker, you've got quite a longer shot in. If you go close to the bunker, how close will you go before your ball rolls into it? That's up to you to bite off as much as you want to. It's quite challenging. Doesn't need to be a large bunker either to be so challenging. It can be just a little small pot bunker in the middle of the fairway at about 250 yards, and that might be enough. On a fairway that might be quite wide, it might be just plenty to put doubt in your mind, the seed of doubt in your mind as you're hitting a tee shot. That's the beauty of St Andrews. So these stacked layered turf bunkers, they're quite challenging. Some of them are very deep, quite small. Some people you'll find that they'll have to hit out sideways to get out of them. Some players might not have a shot. Some have got to play it left-handed. You'll see sometimes people with 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the bunker just to get a stance. Some of them will play it from their knees. That's the chance of St Andrews. It doesn't need to be fair. You don't need to have a level shot. You don't need to have a good stance playing a bunker shot. But it's quite different to anything here in Australia. We're big, large, broad bunkers more often than not. Our designed bunkers are big, or what I call nice big lobes, sand up the faces. You won't see golf balls plugged in the faces at St Andrews because there is no sand on faces. It's stacked layered turf. It'll hit that wall and it'll drop straight down. And that could well be the most difficult shot in golf. A golf ball sitting up against those very steep bunker faces, and you've got to try and get out. Quite possibly the most difficult shot in golf. But that's St Andrews. And the other reason that they have these very steep walls, steep bunker faces of stacked layered turf, is it's a very windy location, St Andrews. So where sometimes we have in Australia, and you've probably seen it at your golf course, on the larger bunkers. If it's very windy, you'll see sand blown out of the bunkers on the fairways. Sometimes on the greens, surrounds, wherever. Have a few days of extreme wind, lost heaps of sand. Some courses, we used to do it, where you have to top up your sand every now and then after a couple of years because the sand's slowly been top dressing somewhere else by Mother Nature. But at St Andrews, the deep style bunkers protects them from the wind. It stops the sand being blown out of the bunkers when it's extremely windy, and it's very windy there very often. So the steep-edged bunkers are not just penal, they're also practical because it stops the sand being blown out of the bunkers. And the sand doesn't get blown around in them so much. So it's a maintenance thing. Very, very interesting. So that's a few things for you to look at, guys, and think about. I really hope you watch some of the golf this weekend. It's really exciting, really interesting to look at the golf course and compare it to what you know. It's quite different. It's something you may never have experienced before, something you may never experience, but some of these elements you might experience as you travel around and play different golf courses in Australia and certainly around the world, if you have that luxury. So things to understand. But everything you see out on your golf course is a worked element from the home of golf, from St Andrews. Bunkers are all different styles based from St Andrews. The way the golf holes are run out and laid out are different styles based around St Andrews. Everything comes back to St Andrews. The way the fairways are placed are made, the humps and the hollows in the fairways, the way that we replicate. Everything you see on a golf course you play is essentially a form of replication of St Andrews, a form of copying elements of St Andrews, bunkers, greens. It's why we see double greens. It's why you won't see crossover holes, but it's why we see all these different weird things. So I say weird, they're quirky. They are what makes St Andrews unique. They are what makes St Andrews very, very special. But remember, it's from a different time. So what you see on television, a lot of the things you won't see on golf courses today. Sadly so. But it's also what makes St Andrews so special. But when you're watching, I hope that gives you a few pointers. I really want you to be able to look at it and understand a little bit more about what you're seeing on television. But enjoy the coverage. Enjoy the way the ball moves. Understand how differently that moves to anything you might have experienced. And can you imagine, because it's public access, what it would be like for you to go and play golf as it is played over this weekend, quite dry with lots of bounce and run. It's going to be a little bit faster than what you might be used to, of course, because it's a tournament spec. But generally speaking, that's the way St Andrews plays. That's the way they want it to play, because that's St Andrews. And at the end of the day, guys, that's how golf was first played. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for listening to the Greenkeeper Shed. Hope you got some takeaway, guys, and some takeaway points. And I look forward to catching up with you very, very soon for another episode of the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast. Well, there you go, guys. A quick return for the Greenkeeper Shed on the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast. And I hope for you out there, you players out there that aren't too sure about certain things, it gave you a little bit more of an insight and understanding on what some of those things are that we're going to see at the Open Championship this weekend. And if you've come across them yourself, and you're playing golf out there, something you might come across in the future as well, and you might understand it a little bit more. It's just a little bit of an education process and something that hopefully I shed a little bit of light on for you. As always, guys, please like, share, subscribe. I appreciate all the comments and anyone interested in getting in touch with me about any of the topics that I've talked about. Happy to chat away on social media. You can find me at the Golfing Greenkeeper on Instagram, the Golfing Greenkeeper on Facebook and Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. So on all the socials, which is great stuff. So I hope to see you out there on socials, and we'll be commenting from time to time. It's always great to chat, and I really enjoy it. So thank you, guys. I appreciate you taking your time out to come and listen to the Greenkeeper Shed on the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast. I'll leave you with, as I always do, you hit them clean, we'll keep them green, and I'll catch up with you very soon.